Okay. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah Jensen, and I'm with the Norman Police Department. I'm our Public Information Officer, and today we are hosting a panel with a number of representatives from the Norman Police Department, the Cleveland County District Attorney's Office, and Norman Public Schools to address some common questions and topics that have come up in relation to our School Resource Officer program. So we're going to go ahead and dive into the panel discussion, starting with introductions. And so, Chief Foster, would you like to introduce yourself?
Chief Foster, I'm the Chief of the Norman Police Department.
All right. ADA Johnson.
Yes, Christy Johnson, Assistant DA, Cleveland County Juvenile Division. I've been in this position since 2011 and have had the opportunity to work with Norman Public Schools as well as the Norman Police Department regarding the juvenile delinquent population within the city of Norman, and with the school resource officers during that time.
Great. Dr. Migliorino.
Yeah, Nick Migliorino, Superintendent, Norman Public Schools. And just for understanding, I've been a part of Norman Public Schools through the entirety of the SRO program from its inception.
Sergeant Formby.
Hi, I'm Sergeant Formby. I've been with the Norman Police Department. This is my 31st year. I'm an SRO over at Alcott Middle School, and I have worked actually for Norman Public Schools as a campus police person since 1992. And I've been an SRO since 2015 with the Norman Police Department.
Great. Neelan.
My name is Officer Neelan Greenwood. I've been with the police department for the last 7 years. I am assigned as a school resource officer to Norman High School.
Daryl. I saw that he was on here. Daryl Pyle, City Manager, is on the call. John Stiggy.
I think the city manager just came off mute.
Daryl Pyle, City Manager, City of Norman, been here since July of 2019.
Great. John Stiggy.
I'm John Stiggy. I'm the Standards Administrator and the Grant Manager for the Norman Police Department.
Great. Justin Milner.
Justin Milner, Associate Superintendent and COO for the district, and oversee operations for Norman Public Schools, and safety and security in the SRO program fall within my division.
Marcus Savage.
Lieutenant Savage. I'm with the Norman Police Department. I was an SRO for almost 3 years, about 2 years ago.
Deputy Chief Jackson.
Deputy Chief Jackson with the, of course, with the Norman Police Department. I've been with Norman for 34 years, and my apologies for the lack of video. I'm having technical difficulties.
And then Captain Hawkins.
My name is Shawn Hawkins. I'm a captain of the Norman Police Department. I have been with the Norman Police Department for 20 years, and I have been the captain over the SRO program since it began in the 2016-2017 school year.
Great. These are the individuals that will be addressing questions as we move through this. To start, we're going to give a brief overview of the grant that is proposed in regards to funding some additional positions for the SRO program, and John Stiggy is going to lead that. So I'm going to pull up the presentation.
Yay.
All right, here we go.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, Sarah, to talk about this, and I hope this is informative. Just going to give a brief overview of the COPS hiring grant, and the intention of this has always been to fully fund our SRO program. As many people know, PSST 2, which passed, I believe, in 2015, required the addition of 13 police personnel to the Norman Police Department so that we could fully implement a school resource officer program. And that program was to be jointly funded with the Norman Public School System. The purpose of this program was to ensure the safety and security of the schools and to allow police officers to have positive interactions with youth, especially those that have been marginalized and don't have many positive connections with police officers. There is an associated memorandum of understanding with the school that details in quite a distinct amount of information, details the limits SROs have in the involvement with students during the discipline process and the rights that students have in that process. The fundamental premise is that SROs don't simply respond to behaviors, but they have an opportunity to pool resources, share information, and work with local entities to redirect and refocus energy, not simply punish. SROs are considered a resource for their schools. They provide guidance, direction, and assistance to both students and parents. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to hire all 13 SROs, and so we've looked for funding opportunities that would help us complete that, that mandate under PSST2. Although we've applied for several grants and opportunities for funding, on March 10th, we were able to apply for the COPS hiring program with the last 4 SROs in mind, to be assigned with our elementary schools to split time with their elementary schools as defined in the MOU. On June 29th, the police department received notice that we were awarded the grant, which covers up to 75% of entry-level salary and fringe benefits for new officers. This grant is for 36 months or 3 years. And we do have to retain those officers for at least 12 months after the grant is done. The city of Norman does take on the obligation of paying a minimum of 25% cash match. And the maximum amount that the federal grant funds for each officer is $125,000 over the life of the grant. So for 4 officers, that means a total of $500,000 for the 3 years that the grant covers. The funds are limited in what they can be spent on. They must be used to hire new officers that are in addition to our currently funded level of sworn officers. They can rehire officers that were laid off as a result of budget reductions, or rehire officers that are scheduled to be laid off at the time of the application for the grant. So, real quick summary, 4 new officers was our request. The total project amount for 3-year period of these 4 officers would be $1,012,000 basically. This is based on the base salary of for years 1, which increases to year 2 and year 3. So base pay is $51,705 year 1, $53,775 year 2, $55,924 for year 3, and then the benefits of $30,000 and a little bit more, for a total of $81,797 year 1 per officer, $84,294 in year 2, and $86,887 in year 3. The federal share then from the grant would be a total of $500,000 in year 1. They would pay $199,209. In year 2, it decreases to $158,008, and then in year 3, the last year of the grant, it would be $142,783. Our local share is $511,915, $127,997 year 1, $179,170 year 2, and $204,766 year 3. Those are kind of the nuts and bolts of the grant. I know that that you could probably read this screen, but I'd be happy to answer questions as we move along. Sarah?
John, one question that I think you can address pretty quickly, just to clarify. These individuals, would they be taken from officers currently hired? Would they remove positions from patrol, or would they be in addition? I think that that's a point that needs a little bit of clarification. These would be new officers, correct?
I think I'm going to have to ask the chief to do the final clarification. What we have done in the past with this is we have hired the new officers, and then when the new officers get out on the street, we actually have an internal selection board that would then find the best officers, the best fit for the position. So actually, the officers that move into the school, and remember that we're not even going to hire until next spring. And then they've got to get out of an academy and get on the streets. So we're looking at the earliest of putting officers in the school under this grant for next school year. So it would be next August before we get anyone in there. And those officers that actually go in the school, unless the chief says otherwise, would most likely be experienced officers selected from our existing staff. And the grant would go over to pay part of their salary.
Great. Okay. I think before we address any further questions, we will move on to Captain Shawn Hawkins, who will be doing a quick, brief overview of the School Resource Officer Program. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, Captain Hawkins.
He's muted.
I guess it would help if I came off of mute. Sorry about that. Good afternoon. I was asked to give a brief overview of the School Resource Officer Program here in Norman. What you see on the first slide in front of you is the Sro Triad. That is NASRO, which is a national organization for school resource officers. Came up with this triad. It's something that the Norman Police Department and the Norman SROs completely believe in. And as you can see, we have added the Norman Police School Resource Officer banner and then the badge with the wings, but the triad, which is the teacher, the counselor, and the mentor, and the officer, underlined by the mentor, are all part of the triad and in a nationally recognized program. Go ahead, Sarah. Some of the SRO objectives I'll go over real quick is to be a visible, active law enforcement figure on campus who is an immediate first responder dealing with any law-related issues. So security for the schools. To act as a classroom resource for instruction in the following areas: law-related education, violence diffusion, safety programs, alcohol and drug prevention, crime prevention, and/or other areas. One of those other areas is a educational program that we have called TEAM, which is teaching, educating, and mentoring. That offers different programs anywhere from say no to drugs to bullying, stay away from firearm education, and all of our SROs are trained to give those anywhere from kindergarten all the way up to the high school. Another objective is to serve as a member of the faculty and administrative team, working hand in hand to create permanent solutions to problems and maintain a safe learning environment. To perform as a resource for the students, enabling them to be associated with a positive law enforcement figure in the student environment. So we're trying to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the youth within our community. Also to be a resource for teachers, parents, students, and for law-related concerns and questions. And we also serve as a counseling resource in the areas that may affect the educational environment, which may or may not be law enforcement related. One of the big questions that has come up is how do SROs work with the school rules? The school rules are just that, the school rules. SROs will not use criminal enforcement authority for the purpose of enforcing school rules or facilitating school disciplinary actions in any manner. Like John Stiggy said a while ago, we do have a Memorandum of Understanding that lists out several of the objectives that I'm currently talking about. And in that MOU, it states, in the event a student misbehaves, the school principal and their designees will be the primary source of intervention and disciplinary consequences. SROs are not responsible for SROs are responsible for criminal law issues, not school discipline issues. We do not get wrapped up in quit running down the hallway or anything like that. That is still a school administrative function that the school administrators do. In addition, on the MOU, there are many types of minor misbehavior. Minor misbehavior may technically meet the statutory requirement for a nonviolent misdemeanor. Stuff like theft, vandalism, disorderly conduct, loitering, incidents related to alcohol, threats, harassments, those can all be nonviolent misdemeanors. But they also can be handled outside of the criminal justice system, and most of the time they are. Absent a real and immediate threat to students, teachers, or public safety, incidents involving public order offenses, such as those that I listed on the last slide, and including disruption or disturbance of school or public assembly, trespass, loitering, profanity, and fighting that does not involve physical injury or weapon, those all may be considered school disciplinary issues and be handled by the school administrators, not by any criminal charges in any manner. And that's kind of a brief overview of the School Resource Officer Program. I am sure that there are some more questions out there, and hopefully we'll cover them with the rest of the questions that we'll be answering. Thank you. Sarah?
Great, thank you. All right, I did miss one introduction. Lieutenant Tushman, can you please introduce yourself? I apologize.
That's okay, I'm the quiet guy in the back, I'm all right. I'm Lieutenant Tushman. I am the School Resource Officer Supervisor over the SROs and the public schools. I've been in this position for 2 years, going on my 3rd year. I've been with the agency for 11 years. Just really enjoy working with kids.
Great. So kind of as a segue from Captain Hawkins' presentation on the role of school resource officers, we're going to kind of jump in. This would allow some additional officers to be placed in the middle school, elementary school age range. And I think people have a question about what is the role of a school resource officer in the elementary and middle school. So let's start with the police department side with Captain Hawkins and Lieutenant Tushman, and then from there we can touch base with Norman Public Schools as well.
Absolutely. You know, the purpose for SROs in the elementary schools is the same purpose that the SROs have in the middle of the high schools. In addition to having a security presence at the schools, no matter if you're talking about elementary school, middle school, high school, SROs are there to help bridge that gap between law enforcement and the community's youth. They serve as mentors, resources, trusted adults for the students to go to, as well as resources for the school administrators and the parents of the students to help out in any way that we can. So across the board, the SROs, whether it's the elementary schools or the middle schools or the high schools, the mission is the same across the board.
Great. Justin Milner or Dr. Miglerino, do you guys have anything you'd want to add about that role as we extend and grow the program?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, you know, thank you, Sarah, for letting us be a part of this and inviting us, Chief Foster. You know, Captain Hawkins' presentation did a great job. From the beginning, everything he mentioned has been a part of every one of our conversations, once again, from the inception of this program. And I think we have met every one of those expectations. But, you know, Hawkins mentioned the side on the relationships and getting into those as a part of this program. I'm going to take it to another direction, is that I'm just going to say having the SROs in our schools, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school, bottom line, it's protecting our students and staff. And I want to be very clear about that. Day to day, they are a part of our school family. They work with our school personnel. They work with the district level, but also they play an important role because, believe it or not, there are people who want to do harm and could do harm to schools. If you look at things around the nation, schools are vulnerable in different ways, and our SROs are there to also help protect our students and our staff each and every day. you know, our SROs and our leadership all the way up to Chief Foster play an active role in all of our safety procedures. They help guide us. And as we all know, in all the entities we work with, communication is key. Effective communication, clear and concise communication is key. And they have helped us, the Norman Police Department and SROs, to really refine our communication between the different agencies, which has been incredible. So that is another role. So we talk about the relationships between the SROs and the students, but it's bigger than that. It's the relationships and the communication between the SROs, the Norman Police Department, school staff, school administration, and district administration as well.
Great. When we talk about the School Resource Officer Program, I think maybe some people don't have a full grasp of it. So Lieutenant Hawkins, or Lieutenant Tushman, or Captain Hawkins, can one of you all go over how many SROs we currently have and where they are currently positioned at?
Yes, we currently have myself, as I said, I'm the supervisor. We then have 8 SROs. We actually have 2 SROs at Norman North, and 2 SROs at Norman High, and we have 1 at each of the middle schools. Each SRO at the middle school, so for a total of 8, each SRO at the middle school is also responsible for either 4 elementary schools or 5. So they cover the elementary and the middle school, each of those SROs.
Great. Okay, the next question kind of bounces off of something we kind of already talked to Stiggy a little bit about, but that was with the recent vote to not increase police funding for what they requested. It is perceived that the number of police officers in Norman has been decreased, impacting their ability to effectively serve our city and do their jobs. What impact, if any, is there on MPD by having to utilize another 4 officers and place them in the schools?
If I understand that question correctly, they're saying what impact does the current budget, or the budget that was put into place July 1, what impact does that have on our ability to put SROs in the school? And the answer to that is that it doesn't change what we currently have. The 9 SROs, the 1 supervisor and 8 line level officers are specifically in a specific fund for the SROs, and that wasn't changed by the budget. The purpose of this grant is to expand that up to the full 13. I hope that answered the question.
And the 4 new positions would not be taken out of current positions currently on patrol or in investigations, correct?
Correct. It wouldn't decrease patrol or investigations or in staffing in any other division.
Okay. Chief Foster, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say, you know, our budget, what we initially proposed was cut. The increase that we put in our budget was primarily due to salary increases, due to the negotiated step raises and associated costs for having the officers that we've added is what made that increase. And also I would clarify that the number of officers have been decreased from an authorized strength of 180 to 171. The situations that SROs handle in schools in general, we would respond to those anyway, whether the SROs are there or not. So having the SROs there rather than on the street, it really helps us out because we don't have to respond. And beyond the actual situations that they may handle, there's students that talk to our SROs, and our SROs are able to head situations off that probably prevents us from having to deal with other issues and problems that we may have encountered had our SROs not been in the schools. I'd also remind everyone that, you know, back in 2008, when the public voted to add the 41 officers to the current staffing that we was at in 2008, and then to maintain those and add an additional 13 officers when they voted for the permanent public safety sales tax in 15. And with this grant, we're just trying to fulfill what the public voted for while trying to maintain our current level of service, which I think now it's beginning to cut into our programs and services. And I am thankful that we are able to start hiring and have an academy soon.
Great. Okay, John C., kind of piggybacking on that, we were asked about the cost of the program and the cost for the additional 4 SRO positions. I think we've covered that piece of it, but do you have anything to add as far as the cost of the SRO program?
I think there's a lot of ways to push numbers out there. Anything that we do that's going to add 4 officers to the SRO program is going to increase costs to the city, whether that's shared cost equally between the school, or whether we use a grant, or whether we don't. When PSST 2 came about, 13 new officers were going to cost the city some additional funding to fund those additional positions. With the grant, however, what the grant does is it pays for funding that the federal share of it pays for funding at a certain level, which then steps down, so that when the grant leaves, we are taking up the rest of that full share of the funding. In year 1, for example, those additional 4 officers would cost us about $85,000 or $86,000 more than what we would be paying for if we just split those 4 officers with the school. In year 2, we would actually probably come out ahead from what we would be having to share with the school if we just hired those 4 officers. In year 3, we're at about $130,000 a year for the additional 4 officers, ahead of what we would be if we simply did a 50-50 split. And then in the 4th year of the program, we would basically be paying for 2 additional officers from what we would be doing if we just split it with the schools, which is about $300,000 a year.
Okay. Kind of going off of that piece, we were asked, what are the statistics justifying the addition of more school resource officers, and what are the research-backed goals that the additional officers are meant to achieve? We'd like to ask the Norman Public Schools kind of, what is behind the idea of adding additional officers, and what do we think that would achieve in the schools?
Thanks again. I'll jump in first, and then Justin, feel free to follow up. But I want to start off with, everything that's already been said is a lot of the information of the why. But really thinking about that question, so you said, what are the statistics justifying it? I'm going to spin that and say, we don't want to be a statistic. That would be the biggest statistic justifying this. And, the goal of the PSST and the vision of that was to have 13 officers in our schools for a reason. And that was all the reasons we've already talked about. Having these officers associated with and connected with specifically our elementary schools right now, who are shared with other schools, is incredibly important. If we truly want to do this effectively, going back and looking at the mission and the vision of what the PSST meant, and that the purpose of putting this in place, the only way to accomplish that is to fully implement that. And that's what, in my mind, that's what those additional 4 officers do. I think we need to do more. But right now, just fully completing the initial vision is where we are. And I'll end with where I started was, I don't want to be a statistic. So Justin, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, and great point, Dr. Nick. Again, there's a lot of information out there, but a couple of data points that I just want to draw attention to, because I think school shootings are still, while we've been in this focus around COVID, the school shootings are still a real thing. And in a study not just a couple of years ago of K-12 schools and incidents that occurred in those, 12 of those 74 incidents systems, things that we put in place, those help. But what we have to keep in mind, 62 were within. So the threat's not always from the outside, but within another study, the shooter displayed actually one red flag in 42% of those incidents, which was not caught in time. And so being able to have that human element, trained eye, knowing how to engage with students in a positive way, but making sure that they're reading and understanding what's going on in the building is just a critical element of this program as well.
Great, thank you. Kind of going off of that, we've had several questions addressed to kind of the role of school resource officers so far in the schools, and some questions about statistics and incidents. The first question is, why are school resource officers 3 times more likely to have an incident with a Black student or a student of color? Captain Hawkins or Lieutenant Tushman, would one of you like to start by addressing that question?
Yeah, I'll start. And I'll start by saying that we can't dispute that number. But the important thing to notate about that number is the word incident. An incident does not equal an arrest. And so I can't say that enough as this number is thrown out there. An incident does not equal arrest or necessarily negative any type of action. If a student were to have a backpack stolen out of their car in the parking lot, and we go out and take an SRO takes a report, that's an incident. And so all of those incidents combined, when you look at those, drive some of those statistics. So an incident, somebody in an incident can be a victim, a witness, a suspect, and there's a lot of different things that drive incidents. If somebody calls in and says that one child has assaulted another child and they want to file a docket against that child or something that is not police initiated, again, that's an incident. If somebody drives by a school and calls in and says that there's kids that are on the wrong side of the fence when they shouldn't be, and an SRO responds to that, that's an incident. So I want to be very clear that incidents don't necessarily equal arrest, or don't equal arrest, and don't necessarily mean any type of enforcement action is taken. So I'll end with that. And Lieutenant Tushman, do you have anything to add?
No, you hit the point exactly.
Okay, and then the kind of following up on that, there was a question about truancy issues. I think a lot of questions about truancy and how that's handled. But the next question is, why are school resource officers 5 times more likely to target a Black student or a student of color for truancy related issues?
I'll start the conversation off with this one also. So truancy, the vast majority of times, is not an officer driven or officer initiated statistic. So very, very few times does a SRO put a docket together or write a docket against a student for being truant. And I'll let Lieutenant Tushman follow up on that, and then I think Officer Greenwood's going to follow that up.
Yeah, that is correct. As far as the truancy goes, most of the truancies that are issued are issued by the civilian sector as far as dockets go, not the police side. Majority of my SROs can probably count on one hand the amount of times that they've ever issued a truancy docket. So once again, that's not actually the school resource officer in the school that's issuing those dockets. It's some other civilian entity that has the ability to do a truancy docket on one of those kids.
Officer Greenwood, kind of as a follow-up question, I think it'd be good to hear about this from an actual school resource officer, but someone asked, with regard to the issue of truancy, do the SROs decide which students are held accountable, or does school administration do that?
I would like to first basically start off by saying that the school resource officers in the schools now they have to realize this is not a retirement gig for us. We signed up for this position because we're very passionate about making sure these kiddos are successful, not only in school but outside of the school form as well. So when it comes to truancy, we want to make sure that kids hold themselves accountable. It's going to take them a lot of chances for us to sit down in our office and talk about what's going on. If we see kiddos in the hallways, our first thing is to figure out why we're in the hallways. What are we doing? What can I do to redirect you back to the classroom? And that's really just taking the time to listening to what their issues are. It could be a student in there. It could be a teacher not teaching what they're interested in. And so basically just taking the time to figure that part out. That's what we're here to do. We're not here to call parents all the time or give tickets out. We're here to educate and move forward, because at the end of the day, they're going to be back at school that next hour, the next day, the next week. So we want to make sure that we educate them and move them forward to make sure that they're successful human beings outside of the school. So as far as the truancy goes along, though, the times I've written truancy tickets, it was definitely the last resort as far as there's nothing else that's working. Because when you do that, it's not only hurting that student, it's not hurting the relationship with that student, it's hurting the parent as well. And so we want to make sure everybody's on board before we get to a point where we're having to write truancy tickets. But we got to realize, okay, if the classroom is not working for them, I've brought a lot of students into my classroom just to either complete homework and maybe they're a cool off session to kind of figure out what's going on and then send them back to class. So there's different outlets that we do instead of writing a truancy ticket that we stress before we even start writing paper.
Okay. Kind of going off of that, people ask about these statistics and these numbers, if we are reviewing those as a police department, and like how we use that data as a police department and as a school district to plan for the future and move forward. Captain Hawkins, you kind of want to start on that about how we review those numbers and what we kind of do with the data we collect every year in regards to our actions.
Absolutely. I have heard it mentioned as turning a blind eye, and I would start off by saying that the Norman Police Department and the Norman Public Schools together would never turn a blind eye to an issue that we come up with. The purpose of us keeping the statistics that we keep and looking at them is to identify any issues that we can improve on together within this partnership. I would give an example of that as the very first year. One of the things that we as an SRO team unit underestimated was mental health calls. And so after the first 2016-2017 school year, we realized that mental health was an issue, and we needed to equip our SROs better to deal with that. And so that summer, in between the school years, we got our SROs, every single one of our SROs, CIT certified. So we use those statistics to learn from what's going good, what's not, what needs to be improved on. Justin Milner and I meet on a monthly basis to go over the numbers and look to see what needs to be improved. And so we have never and will never turn a blind eye, because we are 100% sold on this program. We want it to succeed, and in order to make it to keep succeeding with the program, we have to look for constant improvements. And so together, the Norman Police Department and the Norman Public Schools constantly do that.
Okay, great, thank you. Kind of continuing to go off of those questions relating to statistics and numbers that are generated, someone asked what oversight measures are in place to assure that issues are being handled with the same priority regardless of race or other demographic factors. Maybe we'll start with Justin Milner with the schools on that.
Yeah, well, I think Captain Hawkins really captured it both in the presentation and just with his comments, because initially with the MOU and outlining the roles and responsibilities of the SRO officers and the data collection that's being discussed was with the intent and set out by those that were putting this together to make sure that we were collecting the right information and making sure that we're doing, so to his point, you know, it's not about just collecting it and putting it on a shelf, but then reviewing, making database decisions. And that's exactly what we do on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, and on an annual basis. And those, as he mentioned, really drive whatever corrections we need to make. So for example, as we saw, and he mentioned the mental health, then training was added to as a result. You know, we continue to make diversity, inclusion, equity priorities for our district. One of the reasons why Dr. Millerino, not specific to SROs, but just in general, asked for a committee to be put together around just that, equity, inclusion, and diversity, and why he added an executive director of equity, inclusion, and diversity to his cabinet with the hiring of Stephanie Williams. So being able to continue to monitor, review, and train, whether it's our staff or others in those areas to be mindful of the needs in our district.
Great, thank you. Kind of pulling off of mental health related issues, I think that a number of members of our community have a confusion about the term protective custody, which is how we refer to some of those mental health related calls. And so we have the question, when we look at incident numbers, what does protective custody mean? And what percentage of those numbers would be for students not engaging in wrongdoing? So Lieutenant Tushman, do you want to talk a little bit about protective custody and what that is and how we address that?
Absolutely, I would love to. Protective custody basically is helping someone, a child that's in a dangerous situation. It may be the kid is threatening to harm themselves or harm somebody else, and what they need is they need a counselor. They need somebody who can give them the mental health benefit to help them be successful in life. What a protective custody is we take that child to a center such as, say, CRC, if they meet the parameters in order to go there, which is usually a threat to themselves, a threat to someone else, or, you know, they're maybe having delusional thoughts, or they're having trouble in their own mind with whatever circumstances. The goal is that's not an arrest. That is strictly us taking them to get counseling, potentially medications, whatever they need so they can continue to be successful. As far as the victims or people who call in on them, no, that's not something, we don't take those people for protective custody. You have to meet a large parameter of events in order for us to say, okay, well, this criteria has been met. And once again, it's not a punitive punishment to the child. It's something we do because truly we care. And I mean, and that's the honest truth. We truly care. Mental health is very important, I think, in policing period nowadays, not just in schools. And I think as a Norman Police Department, we have done a really good job recognizing that mental health is part of society today, and we need to address that correctly. And addressing that correctly is getting those people the help and treatment they need so they can lead productive lives. And that's what the goal is in our schools.
Okay, that's good information. Kind of shifting roles a little bit, we had a couple of questions. I think that a lot of questions from the community come from things that they've seen on a national level versus things that they've seen on a local level. And some of those include some incidents, like such as handcuffing a 5-year-old student, is one that was brought forward by a resident and said, is this something that could actually happen here? And would this be possible within our school resource officer program? And so I want to bring in Lieutenant Savage to kind of talk about how are arrests handled in the schools, how frequent does that happen, and kind of talk through that piece.
Most of the time, arrests don't necessarily happen the way you think they do. If something is unlawful and it meets a state charge, that kid still goes home to their parents and stuff like that. I'll get together the paperwork, I'll get together statements. Also, like, I can't talk to that kid until their parents are aware of it also. And then I can present charges to the ADA. Other than that, you know, as far as putting cuffs on kids and taking them to a some sort of lockup facility. There's no such thing as JIC anymore in Norman. The couch center, I'd have to go through a judge. The shelter is not the best place to take kids. So either through the schools, it would have to go, back to the parents and, school administration calling the parents and dealing with that whole entire thing.
Lieutenant Savage, can you talk a little bit about, in your experiences, what have those interactions with students been like, in those heightened times or tense, what have your interactions with students been like here in Norman?
For the most part, my interactions with students have been pretty good. I've made a lot of friends. I've been now back on second shift, so I work from noon until 10 o'clock. I still see some of those kids, and some of those kids that were in middle school or elementary school, I still see them out and about. I still see parents. All throughout the summer, I saw parents, and they were like, "Hey, Savage, how you doing?" And I was like, "Hey, how are you doing?" And I talked to a parent just yesterday. I hadn't had their kid in a school for almost 3 years now, and they had an issue and they just wanted to talk. So they called up and left me a voicemail, and I called them back. But, it just opens up those lines of communication with police officers that, can always get them some sort of resources or at least answer the questions for them.
Great. And Dr. Migliorino, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to remind everyone also, although officers may at times get engaged with students in conversations, they are still working side by side with our counselors, our principals, and taking lead from them. The officers aren't giving the direction to the site administration. These are school issues. Officers aren't disciplinarians. They're there to build relationships. Most of the time, they're just around if needed. We handle our work because our work is all about kids. So our site administration, our counselors, our teachers handle it. The incidents and the situations that the others have shared are at another level. Do know that the school is working with all of these students first.
That's great information. Thank you for adding that. The next question kind of shifts to publishing statistics and how we publish those and how those are reported and if they're made available. Lieutenant Tushman, do you kind of want to start on that topic about, how that's tracked and if those are published?
Yeah, we track our stats every month during the school calendar year. It's completely broken down per school. So elementary schools, all 17 elementary schools are clumped into one group as elementary schools due to the simple fact that we just don't get the large call volume each of those schools to separate them. So we keep those together, all 17 of them. The 4 middle schools and the high schools, we keep track of each school as far as calls from arrests to dockets by police or dockets by civilian or field interviews, protective custody. And the numbers are broken down each month by how many calls are at that particular school. From there, it goes to, for that month, it'll go through all the month and how many custodies we had, how many arrests we had, how many dockets we had, how many FIs we had. The number of total is a running total that starts in August and it runs right through till the end of May until school ends. Furthermore, what happens is those numbers then are broken down by demographics, which was asked by the chief, our prior chief. Those demographics are broken down, which will break it down into race and male, female. So this we're keeping track of those numbers too to make sure that we're not higher in one area than the other. And once again, I think back to what Captain Hawkins says, it's accountability for us to look at these things and make sure all things are running good the way they should run. So we keep track of that constantly. We've been doing that since 2016. We keep track of all those numbers.
And I will say, as a police department, we are committed to transparency. And so as we continue to move forward, we will work with the school district. And if those are reports that the community asks for, to an extent the information can be shared based on open records and things of that nature, we will look at how we can continue to be transparent and carry that message as well. the next topic that kind of came up is that if someone does have an interaction with a school resource officer and they want to file a complaint or make a complaint against that officer, how does that process happen? And then also, how do we make sure that it's transparent and also easily available to everyone? And I think Deputy Chief Jackson's going to take that question.
Absolutely. Thank you. And that's a very good question. Yes, we have processes in place that if, and not only just our SROs, if you have a problem with any officer or any employee with the Norman Police Department, we have a process where you can report that to any supervisor on duty. You can come into the lobby, you can call on the phone. We will take those complaints and we will follow up those complaints. We have in our investigations, our professional standards division, we have processes put in place that we initiate investigations on each and every complaint, internal or external, and we fully investigate each and every complaint from the start to the finish with a disposition. So, and part of that is getting back with the complainant and advising them as to the nature of what was done as far as corrective action to a point. So it's open, it's transparent. And I will tell anyone out there listening, if you file a complaint with any one of our employees and you have an issue with either how you believe the investigation was conducted, or you're not being spoken to or being updated on any part of the investigation, feel free to contact myself at the police department, and I will resolve whatever issues you may have with the process that we put in place to conduct our investigations or the follow-up of said investigation.
Great, thank you, Deputy Chief. Kind of shifting gears a little bit again, the next question is, how will student advocates, other than the school administration who are welcoming SROs into the school despite the stance of the American Federation of Teachers, be involved in the decisions surrounding school resource officer implementation and oversight? And we think the schools could potentially address that.
Yeah, Justin, I'll jump in first. If there's something you want to follow up with, feel free. So basically the question is, outside of school site administrators, myself, Justin, principals, who's working with SROs? And, I mentioned earlier that our officers, when they get engaged, typically an administrator or a counselor has already been engaged. But we also, I believe we're still one of maybe 2 districts in the nation that have student advocacy counselors at our sites that are really there for the students. So that is one role. I know our high school officers and middle school officers know who our advocacy counselors are. They work a lot with those counselors and really from the perspective of what is the true need of a student. Our goal in Norman Public Schools is never to remove a student or discipline a student, because we know they're coming back. How do we change behaviors? How do we alter behaviors and help families and students ultimately? And that's why we implemented the advocacy counselors. And it's an incredible model, just like the SRO program is an incredible model. It's actually a model that I think what people are wanting in all law enforcement is what we're doing currently here in Norman Public Schools. But with that said, I also have I have plenty of councils. I'm all about getting input from groups. I also have a student advisory council that I meet with monthly, and we talk about safety and security. And the SROs are something that they want, they need. They want more SROs in the building because they understand the importance of having them there from a safety perspective, but they also understand the relationship piece, and it just creates a sense of comfort for a lot of kiddos and staff as well. But in regards to the student side, there's a lot of direction and a lot of advice and a lot of questions brought to me through my student advisory council on how the SROs, and it's all complimentary, and I wish they could do more kind of conversations. And this is brought up from them. They set these agendas, they set this, and they bring this information to me. So those are 2 examples. I hope that answers your question. Justin, do you want to add to that?
No, I think you've captured it.
Did I answer your question, Sarah?
Yes, yeah, that's great information. Thank you. kind of going back a little bit to the complaint issue, school resource officers have been a topic that has been brought up in a number of community meetings over the last weeks and months. Some of those including some complaints that were versed publicly about school resource officer behavior. Deputy Chief Jackson, do you want to kind of address some of those complaints that have been made publicly and how the police department has addressed those or looked back at those cases?
Okay, if I understand the question properly, some of the comments that were made, and it was a recurring theme over and over again, it was a theme of the pipeline to prison. And I will say, just backing up, when we first entered into the agreement with the schools, and per our MOU, and also per information on the COPS grant, one of the things that we specifically noted in those two documents is that it will not be a pipeline to prison. And as a matter of fact, the information on the MOU and the contract is specific about being partnered, working in partners with the school administration, also being counselors and mentoring. And so I will say that I've seen this firsthand. When I was the commander over the SRO program a few years back, I made my rounds through the schools, through the middle schools and the high schools, and I shadowed my SROs, and I watched how they interact with these students. And I saw the passion and the feeling of responsibility and mentoring and molding these young minds on a first-hand experience. I can give you story after story, walking the halls with these SROs and their interaction with the students that left me with a positive feeling that we're moving in the right direction. Being a Black male in this country, I'm very familiar with those things. I'm a little bit sensitive when it comes to those in positions of power, abusing those powers for means that are I feel are unjust or not in an equitable fashion. And so, particularly when I looked through those documents and I saw how they were worded, I was heartened to find out that we are very aware of trying to prevent those types of status type issues amongst our students in our schools. So I can go on and brag about these guys. You know, we have 3 SROs on the panel that can also talk about what they do and their involvement in the schools. Wish we could have had all 8 of them on, but we can't. You know, time would not allow for that. However, I can brag on and talk about each and every one of them and the good they've done in the community and in the schools. So I hope I answered the question.
Deputy Chief Jackson, just a quick follow-up note. I think that part of that question was in regards to some claims that individuals had made about negative or bad behavior or concerning behavior on the part of our own SROs in the school. Can you speak a little bit as to far as, like, I know you've addressed this a little bit with the complaint process, but when complaints or things of that nature do come forward, how we address those as a police department?
We take them serious. We investigate each and every complaint. That is what we do. In particular, we do these because, bear in mind, you know, we are talking about our most precious asset, and those are the children that we have under our care. And so if there's a complaint on an SRO, you know, we take that very, very serious. Also, additionally, we just don't put any particular officer in the school. You know, you have to have a temperament to work with young men and young women. And so we specifically identified those with that specific temperament, and we put them in those schools. We train them and put those in the schools because we feel that the individuals that have this passion to do well by our children are the ones that are going to do the most efficient job. And so any complaint we receive from an SRO, we look into with due diligence. And I can tell you, in the few years I was over that unit, we had very, very, very few complaints, and the complaints did not involve the children at the school, if that makes any sense. There were minor complaints such as maybe damage to property, an accident with a car or something like that. But along the lines of serious complaints against an SRO, I just never saw it.
Great.
And bear in mind, each and every one of those complaints we investigate thoroughly.
And Sarah, can I jump in here also, if you don't mind?
Absolutely.
It is a question that's asked later, but I believe Deputy Chief Jackson just hit on it. As far as our SROs go, something that is super important to us and very important to me as a supervisor in our police department is we don't want, I think every officer has an area that they're strongest in, just like any job. We don't pick our SROs just by, hey, you know, you've been on 20 years, do you want to come work in the schools? One thing we pride ourselves on is we put a job announcement out for them to put in for it. We hold a panel board and we pick SROs for those schools, for the schools period, that have a passion for children. In interviews may not ever get an SRO position because we have to pick the best of the best that we know is dealing with our youth and society today. So I think that in itself, one of the reasons we do that is that does lessen up, you know, stuff that goes on in the schools or complaints against officers, because you're putting officers in the schools that truly have a dedication and passion for working with children.
Also, Sarah, if a citizen has concerns about how we conduct an investigation, there's processes in place that they can utilize to review what was done, and we have NCAB as a partner with us. We utilize Norman's Citizens Advisory Board to review investigations if there's any comments or concerns about how an investigation was conducted. It's not just the police supervising the police. You know, these are citizens selected by citizens to help us do our job and review what we're doing to make what we do more efficient. And so there are things in place that other than just reporting to the police, if you have an issue with how they feel an investigation is being conducted.
Sarah, I think it's also important just to add to what Lieutenant Tushman said is the school's also involved in those panel boards in the hiring of the SRO officers. I know I have participated and know Dr. Nick has also participated in those. So we really appreciate having that input into the process.
Great, thank you for adding that in. That's great information. Something that Deputy Chief Jackson brought up was the idea of a school to prison pipeline. And we actually have one of our ADAs, Christy Johnson, on the panel to speak on that. The question that came in was, does having school resource officers in schools facilitate the pipeline to prison for crimes or incidents that occur in our county schools? Are students punished like felons, leading them to a path of failure by establishing a criminal record while they are a student? Christy, can you kind of talk a little bit to that question?
Certainly. I've had an opportunity to review the data. I see no data that supports the school to prison pipeline, specifically in Norman and Norman Public Schools. I looked at the referrals of juvenile delinquents and the 2015-2016 school year, which I think was the year prior to the SRO program. We had 107 contacts with juveniles that year. The following year, we had 108. And since then, we have not been over 100 in referrals from Norman from Norman PD. Now, again, this is all of Norman PD. I don't have data that specifically goes to just the schools, but I can tell you that in the time that I've been here from 2011, watching the SRO program come in and just being a juvenile prosecutor for almost 9 years, every trusted adult in a student's life is beneficial. And I believe the school resource program at Norman Public Schools has been a force multiplier for good in responding at the lowest level to issues. The school resource officers have been very proactive, and anytime they can resolve things at the lowest level so that the courts do not need to get involved, we are very happy. We want safe communities and safe schools for our kids. And this program, I think, is so beneficial that we almost cannot afford not to have this program and more officers into the schools, again, to keep them safe and just for the benefit of the schools. So no data that I've seen supports the school to prison pipeline.
Kind of going off of that, Christy, in regards to juvenile cases that come in, how many of those do you see truly go the criminal route versus leading to other resources or community programs?
Most of them that come in, the whole goal is treatment, to address the issue, resolve the issue, get the student and the family the resources that they need. Very few times have, I think I can count on one hand how many times we filed a motion to certify as an adult in the time that I've been here, and again, in almost 9 years. So the majority of them get a program, work a program, and at the end, the confidential juvenile proceeding is dismissed and closed without a finding of guilt, and they go on with their lives. Of course, there are the youthful offender cases that we see as well, but the majority of contacts that we have, we never see them again because they get the treatment and the resources that they need. And the school resource officers have contacted our office with, asking about different resources, especially in the early, when this first started. And they worked very closely with the Office of Juvenile Affairs, Juvenile Services Unit to get the resources. And that has been very helpful because we just see less and less and less need for it reaching our level because they can address it at the lowest level. And that has been very helpful to the students to get the treatment that they need to get on a better path.
Great, that's great information. Kind of going from that and talking about treatment and early intervention, a program that we have here at the police department, the Juvenile Intervention Program, I think kind of leads to those same tenets and same purposes. Captain Hawkins, do you kind of want to talk a little bit about that Juvenile Intervention Program? We had some questions about that.
Yeah, absolutely. The Juvenile Intervention Program was established in 2012. And the program, it's to identify at-risk youth, provide resources to at-risk youth and their families in order for better life choices and better decisions to be made. The program was designed to help kind of fill the gap that exists between the time when at-risk behavior starts and when counseling and mentorship programs are court-ordered. So what Christy was talking about, if you have a youth in our community and they start displaying any type of at-risk behavior, it usually starts very small, something like a petty larceny or a runaway or something like that is handled in a municipal court level. It takes several months of at-risk behavior before it hits a state level where Christy sees that. And so if we can get in there and provide resources to the families and to the juvenile, the student, before it gets to that point, then we have seen more success to where it doesn't get to a point to where it reaches Christy's desk. And so those resources include anything, well, it includes two things. It's a two-prong approach that we have. The first prong is a mentor that we assign the student, and the mentor is an officer that checks in with them on a regular basis, talks to them, takes them to lunch, gives them guidance and an unbiased shoulder to talk to about any family issues that are going on, any school issues that are going on. And so that police officer mentor really assists in that. And then the other thing that we do is try to get the student and the family and anybody else in the family that needs it counseling. Because if you fix a situation without fixing the whole process and send the student into that situation and expect excellent results, you got to fix the whole thing. And so sometimes parents need counseling, sometimes the whole family needs some family counseling. And so we provide that. We have different counseling organizations that provide that either in home, in office, and sometimes they actually go to the school and do the counseling at the school. So the Juvenile Intervention Program is available. The SROs see students that sometimes are in need of that program and refer students to that program. The counselors sometimes refer students to that program. And so we've had success with that program and we're proud of it.
Thank you. We are trying to keep this right around an hour, just so that this is a consumable product that you all are able to listen to and get information, but there is a lot of important information that that we do want to cover and we do want to get into your hands. And so there's a couple more questions that we have that we want to address pretty quickly. But the next one being, and I think that this is an important one, from our community is there a difference in the number of incidents occurring in schools where there is an SRO compared to schools without SROs? And so I'm going to throw this to Dr. Nick to start with, about really just speaking to kind of the effects of having the school resource officer programs. I know we've touched on it a little bit, but maybe just kind of wrapping that piece up.
Actually, I think I'm handing this over to Justin. Is that correct, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a little bit difficult to answer because we are fortunate to have SROs in all of our secondary sites. And I think it would be unfair to compare that to elementary. But back to some of the other data that we talked about, looking at school to school and making sure the equity is there, that if we see indications that things are disproportionate, that we drill down as to the cause of that and try to make sure that we address that through training or anything else that may need to be. And, you know, the couple other things that we haven't talked about is that, you know, I think we all know of some great things that have taken place that, you know, the foundation was laid early on with what was discussed in the earlier, making sure that we were very conscious, putting a strong program because we've heard of those bad examples out across our country. So it was purposeful in making sure that we did not repeat those mistakes of others. And then we've continued to build on what we all believe to be a national model with the addition of our Handle with Care, with the Crime Stoppers, where it's a direct communication there, safety assessments of our schools, and, you know, intruder training for our staff on an annual basis. So all of those things go into creating a stronger program that I think we're all very proud of.
A key thing that we wanted to have our school resource officers on to speak to were some of those. One of the questions asked by a community member was, what are the positive outcomes that SROs have had in Norman Public Schools? And I think sometimes it's hard to track those type of things, but we wanted them to come on to speak to what have SROs been able to do in the schools? What have they been able to prevent in the schools? What kind of positive outcomes they've been able to have? So we'll start with Officer Greenwood on that.
Well, as far as the positive interactions we've had with the students, we got to make sure whenever we put on the uniform, we're doing it for the right reasons. And so building trust with these kiddos is very important. Starting from day one, we go into the schools. Only thing kids have based off of police is social media, maybe parent influence. And so we're going up there on an uphill battle. And so gaining that trust and letting them know that we're not out to get them. We're not out to put them in handcuffs or put them in jail. But we're actually there for a resource. We're there to mentor. So now, me being year 4 going into the schools, I have kiddos coming to me first before they even go to administrators with news, with possible fights going to occur, bullying happening. So being able to gain that trust and for them to come into my office with open information, with me not even going to them, has really shown a difference on what these kids really see in the police officers here in Norman. Situations as getting them haircuts, getting them food. We have kiddos that had my first year there. A kiddo stole from the lunchroom, and instead of going there on a police level, letting them know that we're not out to get them, I just wanted to hear their story. Why are you stealing from the lunchroom? What can I do to help you prevent that from moving on? So giving them life lessons, giving them lessons to let them know that this is how we prevent going on in the future, that I'm not out to get you. I'm going to see you tomorrow. I'm going to see you in a week or two, and just making sure they graduate and be successful. I have parents shoot me emails all the time saying that my son shouts you out at a graduation. And that to me is my success story. That to me is what I like to hear. Knowing that we were there making those success stories for these kiddos, letting them know that officers are not bad people. Are there bad apples out there? Oh yes, there are. But wanted to make sure that that's not us. We want to make sure that give us an opportunity to figure us out, because we're going to figure you out and we're going to move forward and be successful together. And that's what it's all about. It's all about bridging that gap and making sure we're moving forward in the forward direction. And if we have questions, that we get them answered. So especially being in a high school, these are young adults. These are going to be our future people in our community that we want to make sure are set up correctly. And so being able to just be that mentor for these kiddos is awesome. We don't put the uniform on expecting pat on the backs every day. We want to make sure that we're doing it, and we want to make sure we're making sure that these kiddos are going to graduate and get jobs or go to college, whatever they want to do. We want to make sure we're a part of that situation.
And Sergeant Formby, do you kind of want to speak a little bit to your Wednesday Warrior program and some of the positive outcomes you've seen?
Yeah, sure. I started Wednesday Warriors over at Whittier Middle School about 4 years ago. And we started out with about 10 sixth graders. It was a kind of a mentoring group. We had some kids that administration, parents, and myself kind of identified as maybe high risk, low risk, whatever, needing mentoring. We just kind of handpicked some kids to be a part of this program. And so we started out with 10 for sixth grade, but the next year I ended up doing seventh and eighth grade, and I ended up with about 30 kids. And so it's a mentoring group that I help them with getting haircuts. I get them with getting classes. We do a lot of activities in our meetings during lunch. We have outside, the business community has been nice enough to bring food to us, and they feed us during lunch. The kids love that stuff. And we're able to talk about important issues, about behavior in the hallways and in class and outside of class, and to be respectful. I moved over here to Alcott, and believe it or not, I had pretty close to 45 kids in all three of my groups, and we did the same thing. We taught them how to tie ties. We taught them how to shake hands in a business setting or a social setting. We also, one of the projects that we had them do, I wanted to get them into this. I wanted them to form teams. I wanted them to compete against each other at each grade level and form some kind of PowerPoint about leadership and what it meant to them. And so they got to compete for gift cards and stuff like that. And it was really cool because I had some of the guys from the police department and some of the administrators act as the judges. And these kids really love that stuff. But I just want to underscore that I don't ever want a kid to leave my office or the hallway thinking that they're not loved or that they're not important. I want them to make sure they know that I will do everything in my power to make sure that they're taken care of no matter what the issue is. And I think that's something that I take to heart. So I really want to stress that we're not just cops in the schools. I'm just a dad with a gun belt, and I really do care for these kids and how they grow up and how they become great members of the community. I think that's really important for all of us.
Great, thank you for sharing. And just in the means of time, I want to quickly move through. We have about 4 questions that were left that people wanted us to touch on, and so I think we'll quickly move through these. The first is, why isn't Norman Public Schools contributing to this match grant for these additional 4 officers?
So did you address that to us?
Yeah, either to you or and then Chief Foster can speak to it as well.
Well, and I will say, I think we have committed to investing and contributing to the program from the very beginning. You know, historically, from the beginning, it was we were going to continue to invest the amount we were investing in our own program. And those of you who have been around remember we used to have a Norman Public Schools police department. And we had 5 officers that were employees of Norman Public Schools. And so in that transition time with the PSST and the conversations with NPD, that was the commitment. And at that time, it was around $450,000 and let's call it $25,000, $26,000. And fast forward to this last year, we're contributing $658,000+ to the program, and our commitment continues. You know, with COVID going on and everything, we haven't had school up until now since March, and you know, the officers, I know Chief Foster and others, the officers have been able to go back in and supplement. I'll call it boots on the ground. Maybe that's the wrong way to say it, but you know, the officers out and about on a daily basis. But we continued to meet our obligation, even though we were not having school. So I do believe from the beginning we have committed, and we have continued to commit over probably 50% of what it costs for our current officers. In regards to the COPS grant, that is not a part of this. Once again, that's why I think it's taken so long to get to these next 4 officers. Our funding is not stable or consistent and forecastable. And right now, moving forward, I can't tell you in 2 years, 1 year actually, what the environment's going to look like. I know Daryl has the same challenges as well, but I know the intent of you know, the SRO program from its beginning, and that intent was that we would maintain our investment that we had. So I do believe we are investing and continue to invest, not only monetarily, but in support, training, work, collaboration, partnership, and just making Norman a better place as well. So kind of my, no pun intended, 2 cents on that. So I guess I'll hand that off to someone else now.
I think you covered it. Chief Foster, do you have anything that you would like to add in regards to that?
Yeah, just real quick, I would say, you know, I was in on this from the development standpoint from the very beginning, and the schools were very upfront with the funds that they had to put into this program back then, and what they might be able to work up to over the next 5 to 10 years, which was only around 600, which now they've contributed more than that even. I think they are fully into this and fully supportive of it and doing what they can to support this. And I wouldn't want them to cut any further into their budget that may end up cutting teachers or things for the students. You know, when I look at it, I understand that the ordinance said the program was to be jointly funded, but it did not say that it would be a 50-50 split. It did not say that we would add those 13 officers for an SRO program only if the schools could pay 50%. The public voted to add these officers to the current authorized staffing for an SRO program. And at this time, we've only added 9 officers to the program. We applied for this grant to assist in getting the final 4 officers in the program that the public voted for. We could have easily said that in the application that it was to help make up the budget shortfall we knew the schools had, and we did put that into the grant. It was to make up part of that budget shortfall. So I look at this grant as helping to make up the budget shortfall we knew the school system would have, and to help the city fulfill its obligations to the community.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, the last couple of questions, we've already addressed one of them, which was in regards to, I think we've covered how police officers are chosen and that hiring process. But one of the questions is about our current SROs. And I know we've listed how many we have and what school locations they're at, but this person asked, would it be possible to have a larger number or percentage of officers of color, officers that are women, officers with disability, officers that are LGBTQ, to hopefully reduce the anxiety felt by students of color when seeing officers at the school? We're going to have SRO Greenwood address this one.
I think we first have to look at our hiring process, and when we have an opening, we don't see the people of color or females applying for the position anymore. And so it's kind of hard to plug in those choices. We don't even have those choices applying for the job. So to make a difference, we definitely have to get our numbers up when it comes to our application process and getting those individuals hired as Norman police officers. But then when it comes to putting a certain race or a gender in front of a student, in my opinion, that shouldn't matter. If you are doing the job for the right reasons, if you're building that trust, then it shouldn't matter what color or what gender you are, as long as you're doing it and you're doing it correctly. And so building that trust, even from an elementary school kid all the way up to a high school kid, and giving them confidence that they can speak to anybody, and letting them know that we're, at the end of the day, we're all the same person. And so it shouldn't be a special gender that has to be in front of a kiddo to be successful or to feel less threatened. Because I know I could speak with anybody and feel my message came across just as clearly as somebody else. So that definitely shouldn't be an excuse for anybody. But like I said before, if you guys want to make a difference, definitely apply for the position, apply to be a Norman police officer. The job is not as easy as it looks. Like I said, people are quick to judge us based off other past incidents in different cities, different states, but don't realize that we don't do that stuff here in Norman. So like I said, my task for the ones asking questions like that, just to apply for the job and kind of see what we do.
Great information. And then finally, just an easy question to kind of going off of that to wrap up this panel was, would it be possible for school resource officers to wear different uniforms? Or why do school resource officers wear the same uniform that officers do that work in patrol or other areas of the police department? Captain Hawkins, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So they wear the same uniform that all of our patrol officers wear, so that they can be identified as Norman officers, not a subset of or mistaken for security in any way. We want them to be readily identified as Norman police officers when they're in the schools, so that if somebody needs something from one of them, it's not, is that an officer? Is it not an officer? It's clear that we are Norman police officers.
Great. Okay, that concludes all of the questions from the community. We are.
Sarah?
Oh, yes, we are. Hold on just one second, W. Chief. We're appreciative to the community for providing these questions and providing us these topics to speak through. This was meant to be educational, and I'm going to let Deputy Chief Jackson talk a little bit more about that, but we want this conversation to continue, absolutely. Deputy Chief Jackson.
Sure. I'd like to add to what Captain Hawkins said. The anxiety associated with the uniform is a very valid and real anxiety. And what we do to mitigate that is that our officers are in uniform for a reason. We have found that if you have a positive relationship or contact with something that you have anxiety about, it helps to eliminate and alleviate some of that anxiety. So we talked about maybe a softer appearance. We discussed all of those strategies moving forward. But the reality of it is, if officers in uniform are displaying a positive image and a positive role in a mentoring and caring relationship with these students, then the uniform becomes less of a threat and to these students. So that's why we continue to wear a uniform, to kind of help change that narrative and change that perception.
Great. All right, thank you, Deputy Chief. And just kind of going off of that, we want this conversation to continue. If you have questions after watching this, please make sure to either comment on our social media, send us direct messages. I'm sure the schools would be happy to answer questions as well. Reach out to these different entities. There's a number of ways for you to do that through our website or our social media or through our police department email. We want to hear from you. And we hope that you have learned something and got some answers to the questions that you had. Anything that you have to add, Deputy Chief?
No, sir, I think you covered it all, and we appreciate any feedback from our citizens in our community.
Great. All right. Thank you all for being part of the panel, and thank you all for watching.